Hello, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Lida Citroen, and what we're going to be doing is talking about her book, The New Rules of Influence: How to Authentically Build Trust, Drive Change, and Make an Impact. So, Lida, where can people find you?
Well, I'm pretty much on every social platform, and my website is lida360.com. LinkedIn, I'm very active. Enjoy connecting with people, whatever works for them.
Excellent. So, got your book. Really enjoyed it. It's really a book of now, isn't it?
Mhm.
T-
It is.
and tell me the inspiration behind it.
Well, Tim, as you and I've talked about, I work in well over 30 countries. And one of the things I was noticing is people weren't feeling confident asserting their voice. They weren't feeling like they had earned the spot to speak up. At the same time, we see modeled in corporate, in entrepreneurship, and in nonprofit that the loudest people are getting attention. So there was this push and pull between I want to have something to say. I feel like I've got an important message or I want to challenge an assumption, but I haven't earned the spot. And then I see my colleagues just sort of beating the pots and pans to get themselves noticed. And they were stuck. And when we looked at the old rules, the old ways we had been taught to assert ourselves, to get promoted, to be seen, they weren't working anymore. So I thought, let's create some new rules based on what I've been seeing in probably over 20 plus years of doing this kind of work.
And a lot of it, maybe I was wrong, but a lot of it I saw was the driver behind the fact that social media has changed so many things, and a lot of people sort of like, because certainly when I was in corporate, unless you'd been on a course in which you were taught how to talk to the media and were a spokesperson, you weren't allowed to post anything. You got fired.
Right, right.
And so there's this feeling, I think, still that I've got nothing to say, no one's interested in me, and if I post anything and if I make a mistake, everyone's going to laugh at me, and I might get fired.
You know what you're really describing is even a more common thread than just what happens on social media. It's this fear of being judged, right? When you say people are going to laugh at me or I might get fired, we're so afraid of being judged that we hold on to a good idea, or maybe we see, a cliff in the horizon and we're a little scared of that. We don't say what we need to say because we're afraid people are going to mock us or dismiss us. And that's really not good for business because we need to hear from people with different voices in order to make really good business decisions. And smart leaders understand that.
You talk in the book about and emphasize the need for authenticity,
Mhm.
and how we can be authentic, and not shouty and jazz hands and that, because a lot of people I see, when immediately you think about, you see something on the TV about an influencer, and it's like, oh, I need to be, and I don't want to be like that.
Right. Yeah, and I was a little nervous about using the word influence because people do think of influencer. And influencer isn't all bad, right? There are a lot of people who have notoriety or fame and are using that platform to drive influence on causes or initiatives that they're really passionate about. But for the rest of us, what influence just means is I want to know that if I offer an idea that I'll be taken seriously, that someone will consider it, that I've done enough homework, that I'm not going to be laughed out of the room. And that's what most of us want. I've been working in personal branding for over 20 years. And when I looked at what we ultimately want when we build a brand, it isn't to have this thing that sits on a shelf, right? You've got a brand, check the box, you're done. It's that brand builds influence. It goes before us into conversations so that we have the credibility and the clout. Now, you mentioned the idea of authenticity. I love that in the last 10, 15 years, that has really swelled to become important. And what I talk about in the book is, authentic and authenticity is kind of a buzzword. It reminds me of like innovation when everybody was innovating, and what did that really mean?
And digital
But
transformation, and that's gone away, hasn't it?
we're so good at the buzzwords, right? But what authentic really means is to be real. So I actually call the rule being real, because I can say to you, Tim, be authentic with me. And you'd be like, well, I kind of thought I was. But if I say, let's get real, right? There's a different understanding. And I'm going cross culturally here. If I say, let's get real, let's have a real heart to heart, there's a different understanding than authentic. But where I do draw the line is I think we need to be authentic and let people know who we are, show them what's in our heart, speak about things we're passionate and knowledgeable about. But I don't believe in authenticity. Authenticity for government and many businesses, but not for people, because transparency gets us into trouble. Transparency is anything you want to know, I'll tell you. I'm an open book, right? You can ask me anything, and there's no boundaries. That's risky. And when you talk about social media, that's where we get in trouble, right? We are sharing ideas or thoughts about conversations we really don't know much about, or haven't, or don't belong in some cases. And we're sharing things that after we've shared it, we kind of want to put the genie back in the bottle, because now we realize I shouldn't have gone that far. And we can't do that on social media. Really can't do it in person either. But I always tell people, be authentic, speak from your heart, let people know who you are. We need that. But always draw boundaries for yourself. What are the topics or the issues or the experiences? You're not going to go there. And that's okay. That's okay. As human beings, we're allowed to have some things private. So,
So how have you seen? Because as I say, the book is very much for now.
mhm,
I doubt you could have written this 5 years ago, because things
mm,
have changed so much.
yeah.
And so, how have you seen digital change the way that we build our influence?
I think we have so many tools now, right? Between Gen AI and social media and just all of technology has given us so many tools. And that's a good thing. And that can be a problem, right? If we don't have a good structure, a good foundation, it's like buying a plot of land, designing a gorgeous house, but not having a good foundation to put the house on. It doesn't matter, because it's not going to be solid. So having a good strategy of, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and this is how I want to be known, then digital can amplify that. Digital can play into that and support it. But technology shouldn't lead the brand. It should support the brand. And so it's a good and a bad. I'm a big fan of a lot of technology. I'm also very nervous when I see people using it wrong, because technology is changing at the speed of light. Our brand, our influence shouldn't be changing that often.
Because one of the things I love your metaphor there for a foundation. Because
Mhm,
one of the things that you have are your 10 rules of influence,
mhm,
which are: be courageous, be real, be credible, be of service, be inclusive, be consistent, be agile, be a storyteller, be visible, and be a brand.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
that, I guess, is what. And in the book, what you do is you walk us through those. We don't
Mhm.
just like turn up and say these are. You walk us through all of those things, and that's the foundation, I guess, isn't it?
Well, yes, and they're and the rules are wrapped into, four key areas. You have to discover first why you want to have influence. Is it money? Is that the main driver? Is it because you feel a sense of purpose? Do you know what your purpose is? So the why is really the first nugget of that foundation. Then we have to understand, who do we want to influence? It's not everyone out there, right? Everyone with a pulse and a checkbook is not a viable audience. But who are the people you care about driving change with, or creating impact? So really understanding who the audience is, and then how do you want to have influence? It's not a one size fits all. My kind of influence might be very different than yours or one of your listeners. And finally, where do you want to have influence? So putting the rules in that context really walks us through a very consumable structure for building the kind of influence that you might want, I might want, or someone who wants to change the world wants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that, I mean, in a way, I kind of got the feeling in the book that you were trying to swerve away from a term of personal brand, while that's something that's used, I also think it's something that's kind of overused, isn't it? But what do you see, or what role do you see personal branding playing in this?
That's interesting. I have had people ask me that if I'm moving away from personal brand, and I chuckle because in 2008 when I excuse me, left corporate to move into the space of personal branding, right? Taking all the same premises that we use to build up a company or a product brand and apply them to individuals. Nobody knew what that term was. Like, I was constantly explaining it. Now it does feel a little overused, right? I'm a personal branding specialist. I'll build your LinkedIn. Wait a minute. um, it's not really what it is. It can be how it is. And I didn't move away from personal brand. Number 10 is to be a brand, because that is my heart. That is where I get my superpower, is to help people understand who they are and why they are, and then we build a brand around that. But brand, again, isn't an end state. It isn't something you have and then you can just sort of go on with life. You have to constantly nurture it, and it folds into this idea of influence, because if you don't have a brand, it's really hard for people to know who you are and what you stand for. So it weaves throughout the book. It's kind of an elevation of brand.
Mm.
Yeah.
So can you give us an example?
Of
Some in terms of in the book, you come up with the new rules of influence.
Mhm.
Can you give it? So you must use this yourself, of course.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I live these principles, and it was the first book I've written. This is number 7 for me. Lucky number 7.
Yeah.
It's the first one where I really shared as much of my own experience as I have. And it's not a classic business book, right? It's not how to succeed in business, right? It's how to show up on this planet and be the kind of human being that you want to be, whether it's small, whether it's really big. There's no judgment here. And so I live these rules. I have seen evidence of people, and there were so many stories I couldn't even include in the book, but I remember one working with he was now leading sustainability and environmental responsibility for a massive consumer products company. And as I worked with him, I asked him, like, what's your origin story? How did you get here? An origin story I'm a huge fan of. I talk about that in the book. And he said, when I joined the company, it was a consumer products company, very heavy into the plastics. He said, I loved my job. I was very junior to the team. But he goes, as soon as like the bell rang and I was out of work, I was out in nature. I'm very much a sports guy. I love to hike and surf and all these things. And he said, but I found over the years I had a struggle coming to work where everything I stood for personally was conflicting with how we were treating our environment through what we did as a company. And he goes, I thought about leaving, but then I decided maybe there's an opportunity to say something. And he was still pretty junior. He'd been with the company a couple of years, but he followed basically the rules in the book without realizing it. And he started the conversations and he did his research and he put together a plan for this big company to lean into more responsible environmental treatment of its products and especially the disposal of the products. And through some conversations and a lot of good influence building, he now runs that initiative. And he's like, I can't wait to get to work every day, as opposed to I can't wait till work is over because then I get to do what I love. So it's bringing his passion into an area where he saw an opportunity and connecting the two. And we see that on big scales. We see people who don't fit the classic mold of executive presence really driving change and raising their hand. They're still afraid of being judged, like we talked about, but they're doing it because there's this overwhelming, non negotiable sense of, I have to do something, I have to say something. And maybe that saying something is going to make things better. And we see that across business, we see it in social causes, and we see it in nonprofit, NGOs, entrepreneurship. We see that, and it is really a beautiful thing.
You talk in the book. I know the title is about driving change and making impact, and I know that you're talking about how discovering your why, finding your who, clarifying, all those things about yourself, and actually doing that internal reflection, which you suggest that people do as they read the book. And actually, that is the thing that actually builds change, or gets that ability for people to go, I want to follow you, which is what a lot of change is about. It's not, the days of telling people you must do this are all gone, whether you're a leader or not.
Right.
And the way that you talk about this and doing all those things is a great way of, as your story says, is a great way of really building out the impact that you can make to influence other people, whether that's your colleague, or whether that's on a project or an initiative that you want to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit at the opening, but this notion of positional power or positional authority, right? And women fall into this, and this is not just an American thing. This is a global thing. We wait until somebody says, "Okay, Lida, now it's your turn," and then I go, "Okay, here's what I have to say." And there are norms around that, and there are customs around that. And when we match that up with this notion of executive presence, that hey, I grew up in corporate thinking that's what I had to look like and sound like and be like in order to be taken seriously, not realizing that the model for that was male, was middle-aged, and wore a suit, and I didn't like to wear a suit. So I was like, well, now what, where's the rule for me? And there is a part of this book that really speaks to those voices that haven't seen themselves in the traditional teachings, right? They're kind of wondering, well, what do I do if I'm part of an underrepresented or marginalized community or group, and I'm waiting for a mentor or someone to kind of lift me up? Well, maybe it's time that you lift yourself up. Some of the habits that we see people doing is sitting in the back of the room, right? I'm just going to sit back here. No one will bother me. If I have a question, I mean, I hope they can hear me. Well, sit in the middle of the room, or maybe even sit in the front of the room, right in front of the CEO, right? And when you have a question or a comment, everyone can hear you. Will they judge you? Absolutely. But human beings judge. That's not something you can get around. That's human nature. We just do. So help them judge you in the right way. So there are these small steps that I offer in the book that aren't, seismic shifts, but they're breaking down that idea of positional authority. This person has a job title, so therefore they must know better. Well, maybe, but maybe you know something that really changes the course of the conversation. And as I said before, good leaders are getting that. I have another example of a client that I worked with who was about to launch a big initiative. She'd done a lot of research, was very excited to share it with her team, got everyone together, and they sat in the room and she shared this initiative, and she's like, I am so excited. Anybody have any questions? And one guy from all the way at the end of the table raised his hand and he goes, I know you put a lot of work into this, but it really doesn't speak to my community. He came from a community that this initiative would impact, but it really didn't include those thoughts. And as he said that, the room became silent. Everybody looked at my client like, uh-oh, he's going to get fired, right? You don't say that in front of the boss. And my client, bless her heart, said, thank you. Tell me more about that. And then she owned the fact that she hadn't done the right homework, right? When I talk about being inclusive in the book, it's make sure if your project or initiative or idea is going to impact different people, especially people that represent things you don't represent, make sure you talk to them and listen without judgment, listen to be curious. And she realized she hadn't done that. So she was so grateful this person raised their hand, had the courage to speak up and say, just so you know, that's not going to play well in my area. And that was therefore able to make the difference. And the project was a huge success because of it. So
I
we
think,
need people to speak up.
and I think that what happens is that quite often people see title as
Hmm.
leaders have a title.
Hmm.
I'm not going to do anything until I'm VP. Whereas
Right.
actually understanding that leaders today don't have all of the answers, and
No.
actually helping leaders and supporting leaders is a good thing to be doing.
Absolutely. And smart leaders are encouraging that. They're
Yes.
not afraid of that. They're not threatened by that. They're saying, what am I missing here? Who am I missing in the room? Right. And I have examples of that in the book of leaders who literally are asking, who is not in the room who should be part of this conversation. I don't care if they're a VP or they just started at the company. Whose voice needs to be part of this to make sure we're not missing anything. Doesn't mean we're going to change anything. It doesn't necessarily mean I take that input and now everything is different. But if I don't hear it, I'm not educated enough to make a solid decision. So I think sometimes people feel threatened by that, right? If I listen to a voice that's not mine or an argument that's opposing, I might question my own position. Well, why is that bad? I mean, question it, resolve it, and then you feel better about it. I don't understand that sometimes, but
I think sometimes people still work to the Jack Welch rules of leadership, don't they? And you know, if I stand up and say that the leader is wrong, then I'm going to get fired. Whereas actually the leader might say, actually, well, that's really good that you told me that, because we were just about to make a big commitment, and I would, and we all would have been fired, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Lida, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book, The New Rules of Influence: How to Authentically Build Trust and Drive Change and Make an Impact. You've got one as well. Excellent.
I do. I have a few.
So if I wanted to buy one, where can I get one?
Oh, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold. They're actually selling a lot internationally, which I love. So, yeah,
I agree with you. This speaks. This is not a US book. This
no,
talks across all kinds of cultural boundaries. It's a
love
you
that.
know, it's a global book for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
You're welcome. So if Lida, if anyone wanted to get hold of you, where would they go?
Oh, LinkedIn is probably the easiest and fastest. My website is lida360.com. Like I said, I'm on every social platform, so I'm not hard to find.
So we can track you down. You're
Yeah.
very visible on LinkedIn, so certainly that's a good place to go. Lida, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it, and I think for anybody that's looking to build their influence or personal brand, it's something that they've got to read.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
You're welcome.